This is 152, and let me get my right page up here. So everything you need is at samsclass.info, although there is a canvas that you need to turn things in. But the lectures and all the description of all the projects are here at samsclass.info. Let me see if I got anybody in Zoom, and it looks like I do. The Zoom people should go to Twitch. That's where I put the visual, and I'll put it in the chat room if I can get this thing to open the chat room. There. I only use Zoom so students can share their screen and get help. That's mainly what it's for. The video from lectures and such I send to Twitch, which I'm putting in the link in the Zoom chat room. I mean, you can stay in Zoom if you like, but Twitch is where most people go. And I use Zoom especially at the start so people can find the class in case they're confused. And if you want to ask questions on voice with a microphone, then you have to come to Zoom. Otherwise, you can put them in text in Twitch. And later on, when people have hands-on projects and have troubles, then they can come to Zoom and share their screen so I can help them. But I don't like sharing my screen in Zoom because it doesn't work well on my machine, and Twitch is better. Anyway, so we're here in 152, and so you can get a free copy of this textbook if you're a City College student with these instructions at the top of the page. And we've got quizzes in your Canvas, and there's another Canvas for there's a Canvas for City College students that you're all already enrolled in, and there is another Canvas for non-City College students, which I'll add to this after the lecture. It's ready. I just didn't put it on the page yet. And anybody who is not a City College student is welcome to take the class, but you, of course, will not earn official college credit. But you'll be treated like all the rest of the students in every other way. You can find out how well you did. So it's okay for people who don't want to try to enroll at the college and don't need the credit. A lot of such people are in foreign countries and such. Anyway, so we're going to go through the chapters in the book, and we're going to do a lot of hands-on projects, which I think is really the meat of the class. And the hands-on projects are very good and very new. I've updated them all. We just taught this class at Black Hat and updated everything. And so tonight we're going to talk about Splunk. The first several projects are all about how to use Splunk. Most of this class we're going to cover pretty much four things: Splunk, the attack matrix, Velociraptor, and Zeek. And then a lot of extra other things. But those are the four main products we're going to use here. And the first two of these things, you do not need to install any software at all. All you need is a web browser for both. So it's going to be about halfway through the semester before you actually have to install some virtual machines and some software. And that'll be to get Velociraptor up and running, which is wonderful. Anyway, so we'll... all right, and I should have something about the grade. Oh, so here's what you have to do. There are quizzes to take in Canvas. There's a discussion board in Canvas, and you have to post discussions most every week. But the main thing you have to do is hands-on projects, which you turn in by finding flags and submitting screen images and flag values inside Canvas, so my grader can check them. And there's a lot of extra credit available. So if you do badly in one part of the class, you can make up by doing more hands-on projects. You also get extra credit by going to conferences and other training events. Just let me know about them. All right. And there should be a sheet about, the grading policy is here, which just says, I think, the same thing I've already said. There's quizzes, there's projects, there's a final exam, there is no midterm exam, and that determines the points. Attendance does not affect your grade, and you do not need to attend at all. You don't earn points for attending. However, if you find the lectures valuable, you can show up to do the lectures, and if you want to do them later, they'll all be recorded and put on YouTube, and they'll appear right on the homepage here, 152, the homepage for the course. In the schedule, right after each lecture, I post them here, so you can view them later if you want to. And if anybody wants to add, they can all add. There's room for everybody. Just make an add request inside the City College system, and I will approve them. Are there any questions about anything? I guess I would have just put it in chat if you had any questions. So let's start talking about the first chapter, which I should have open somewhere. That's right, I had to close it. Well, I can open it now. I had to update it because there were some typos in it. All right. All right. And all the slides are on the webpage like anything else. Everything in the course is pretty much posted on my webpage, so you can easily download it if you want to. So, that's the first chapter in the book, a few real-world incidents. What this book is written by Kevin Mandia, among others, who made Mandiant, who now is the head of FireEye, and they invented this field of incident response for all practical purposes. They were the company you call if you are a big corporation and you get hacked. They send in a team of experts that will figure out who hacked you and what they did and what you can do about it. And they develop the techniques that are used to respond to such incidents. So an event is anything that happens on your network, like a machine breaks or something. That's an ordinary event on your network. But an incident, a security incident, is when you have a violation of security policy. Malware infection, some kind of data was stolen, somebody is doing something they shouldn't be doing. That's when you have a security problem. And you have a executive at your company who is qualified to declare an incident, sort of like declaring an emergency in a state, and that begins the process of incident response. Is there any penalty for taking the class in pass-fail as opposed to letter grade? The only penalty is if you then want to get a city college certificate, like the certificate in cybersecurity, you won't be able to count the class for that. That, as far as I know, is the only penalty. Good. Anyway, so I think it might not count for getting an AA degree either. So check into that if you care about those things. So anyway, the first thing you have to do is decide whether whatever has happened is serious enough to call it an incident. And if it is, then you send your incident response team, and they try to immediately figure out how big the problem is and contain it. And then, now that they determine the scope of what they have to fix, and then they try to figure out how to cope with the incident without disrupting the business any more than necessary. And that is quite a challenge, and it is something that nobody is very good at, and companies gradually get better as they go through many incidents. So you have an investigation team, which has some sub-teams. There's an incident response team. The investigation team determines what's happened and performs a damage assessment. The remediation team is who removes the attacker and then improves your security posture so somebody can't come back in the same way. And then there's public relations, both inside the company and outside, someone explaining to all the people that are concerned what they need to know. So live response is the way you typically gather data in incident response. Now, in the original computer forensics from, say, 20 years ago, the rule was you'd go up to the computer, you kick out the plug and just turn it off, then you take out the hard drive and image the hard drive, and that's all the evidence you collect. And the reason they did that is because they were thinking like police. Their goal was to find out who did a bad thing on this machine so we can prosecute them. And their main concern was to get evidence that would tie directly to one person and evidence that would be high quality and in court. So by imaging only the hard drive when it was powered off, they would image it through a write blocker and they'd get a perfect image and could repeat that image, and every bit would be exactly the same. And they thought the RAM was of no importance because there's no metadata in RAM. If you have a file open in RAM, it does not have an owner and a time of creation on it and permissions. It's just sitting there in RAM. So if I find something in RAM, I really have no idea how long it's been there or who put it there. So if you're thinking about a crime, it's really not much use in court because I can't say who did it or when they did it. But in incident response, we're not really that interested in prosecuting an individual person and figuring out what they did. We're mostly interested in finding out what is happening on the network and whether more damage is being done and whether attackers are moving through the network. So, it's not so much about trying to reconstruct something to punish someone for a crime they already did. It's live combat against a living enemy that is still in there doing damage. So it's a very different thing. And the most important information is usually in the RAM. The processes that are running right now, the network connections that are being made right now might very well be active activity that the attacker is doing right now, and that will be in RAM primarily. So now, most analysis, that's its SST, looks like my attempt to fix my spelling just made it worse. Most analysis is performed on systems that are powered on live. This is the main way you do it. And so you run code on the system and you retrieve information like the running processes and network connections and registry keys and so on. And that is sloppier than the old system because it means you are changing the evidence system by running software on it to collect data, but that we accept as the cost of doing business. And this lowers, this kind of live computer forensics is now a somewhat imperfect activity, like, say, the old-fashioned forensics at crime scenes where you would have blood spatters, and you would then go and take samples of the blood and test it, and that is a destructive process. Once you've done that, those samples are gone. You can't retest the same samples. So you just have to do it right, and you have to talk about what your evidence collection method did to the sample and what was actually in the sample that the crook did. And you have to be smart enough to know the difference, and the same thing's true of computer forensics now with live forensics. I do a technique, which means when I capture my evidence, some of that data is a record of what I did to collect the data, and some of it is a record of what was done on that machine before I got there. And I have to be good enough to tell the difference, and I have to be clear enough to explain in court that I do know what my collected evidence means, even though it is not 100% clean, and part of this evidence is artifacts created by my collection process. But that's no different than any other kind of forensics. So here's the cases, and this I thought was kind of funny. It's really clear to me who these cases are. They're thinly whitewashed. This is obviously Target. That is my personal opinion. I don't have any inside knowledge. I'm sure Mandiant can't say who got hacked, but when you describe this, this really sounds like the big Target hack that got credit card numbers. So in January, they found a SQL injection vulnerability on a web server, and therefore they were able to exploit one server. This server was in a demilitarized zone, which is a semi-trusted part of the network, bounded by firewalls, in a business unit purchased by the parent organization. So it was not the primary company, it was a related company. So now they had control of a database server in a peripheral subpart of the company. Okay, then they were able to use XP Command Shell, which is a SQL module that gives you a normal command prompt through SQL. So now you can run arbitrary code on the server. So now they can download malware and execute it on the database server. So they have taken over this database server here through the web server in this demilitarized zone. Now, they want to get inside the internal network of the company, and this is the whole point of a demilitarized zone, is you let people from the internet come in, but you limit what traffic from there goes into the internal network because you know this is full of everybody viewing your web server and you don't really trust them very much. So they managed to find a weakness in the firewall that let them execute SQL commands on another server inside here. So then they spent weeks inside the network scanning internally, trying to figure out how the network was designed and find more weak spots to exploit, which is what attackers do. The typical attacker is inside a network for 9 months before they get detected. The typical advanced persistent attacker, of course, not the low-level attackers that are just doing smash and grab operations. Anyway, so for a week they used SQL injection, then they found a way to implant a backdoor so they could have direct control over one of the servers inside there. Then they were able to steal password hashes from that local system and get an administrator account on the internal database server. And it was very common at this time that people would make a golden image, and then they would make copies of the golden image with a product like Norton Ghost to all the machines, which means that all the machines had the same administrator password. And therefore you could sign in as local administrator on every machine. There is a more modern process called Swarm, where you can make multiple copies of an image, but it does put a different password on each one. But that's a new innovation, and that was not common a few years ago when Target got hacked. I'm guessing this is Target. But anyway, the book is a few years old, so once you found one local administrator password, you'd have them all. So now we can talk about the general process of attackers. One way to organize this is the Lockheed Martin kill chain. They tried to define the steps through which people go. So you do reconnaissance to try to find out email addresses or something. Then you create weaponization, where you create an exploit. Then you deliver that exploit somehow, like an email or USB stick where somebody runs your code. Now you do exploitation. You run code on the attacker's system through some kind of vulnerability. Then you install malware. Then you have a command and control channel. So a server somewhere can send repeated commands to the server that's under control to do further activities. And then you try to achieve your objectives, whatever they might be, stealing data, bringing things down, or whatever your goals are. That's the Lockheed Martin kill chain. And it's one of the early attempts to sort of make this scientific. The more modern attempt, and the one we're going to use here, is the MITRE ATT&CK framework, which is very, very popular. And this is the latest version of the MITRE ATT&CK framework. They've added a few parts to it. I think I can zoom in and it'll be all right. Actually, I think I can zoom in this way. There we are. There. So, there. Reconnaissance is the first step. And these all have code numbers. Originally it was 1, 2, 3, 4, and you see they added a few more. So first is recon, where they try to learn other information about the company. Then they develop resources of some kind, like developing malware or setting up cloud servers or something that they use. Then they have initial access. They somehow get to insert something into your network, like spam email, and then they get to run execution on some system. So somebody runs code that came from an email or something, and now the bad guy's running code on your system. Then they need to achieve persistence. They have to retain control even if that machine reboots. So they have to configure the malware to automatically relaunch. Then they elevate privileges, because typically when you originally gain access, all you get is a non-administrative account on one unimportant machine, like an end-user laptop. And that's something, but you really don't want to steal the data on a laptop. What you really want is to get to the real goodies in the company, like the credit card numbers, the customer database, the proprietary planning and design documents, and things like that. So you escalate privileges, trying to move from a local non-administrator account up to an administrator account on a single station, or higher to like a domain administrator account. You avoid defenses like antivirus and intrusion detection systems. You try to steal credentials off this machine, find password hashes or whatever other credentials you can steal to log in on other systems. And then you perform lateral movement, moving from the one device you control to take over another device and gradually wander through the network, getting control of machines that are deeper and deeper in the network and closer to the really valuable stuff. Then you start collecting data, whatever it might be, credit card numbers, phone numbers, customer databases, whatever you think is valuable to you. You continue to have command and control here. I thought we saw command and control up here. No, that was the Lockheed Martin. Okay. Then you have command and control centers where you have a outside server which is sending commands to the inside server, and they are sending beacons back telling the server that they're under control. And then you find a way to sneak data out. You steal something like credit card numbers, you somehow package it and somehow sneak it out of the network, which can be quite difficult. And we'll see that when we get to Spunk. And then you achieve your impact. And by the way, you don't necessarily do all these steps. Each attacker has different goals and different methods, but you often do a lot of these steps. And your impact is whatever you're trying to do. You might just want to wipe the systems out and destroy them because you just want to hurt this company. Or you might want to put on ransomware and extort the money out of them. Or you might want to very quietly just live on the network and steal data, which is what the Chinese did to Google in 2010, which started this whole thing. They infiltrated Google, and they put a persistent malware that would just stay inside Google and steal their data and send it back to China, because what they wanted, they didn't want to harm Google, and they didn't want money. They wanted to get Google's contact database, which they used to respond to police requests. They wanted to know who was sending Gmail to other people so that they could track down networks of people that were opposing the Chinese government inside China. So they just wanted to know which Chinese citizens were talking to other Chinese citizens on Google servers. That's what they wanted. And so they went in there and got it. But Google saw it because when they exfiltrated it, a Google engineer saw their data leaving, going to a server in China that was not part of Google. And that was the thing that tipped them off, saying, wait a minute, something is not right here. And Google hacked into that server, which, by the way, was also illegal, and stole all the data back and found all these American companies' data on there, Microsoft and Adobe and everybody. And they went public with it. And that's what made the whole world aware of these advanced persistent threat attacks, which is what this whole course is about. The old-fashioned attacks would just be a smash and grab. Somebody would hack in and steal something, and you could have defenses that would stop them. But now the military will attack you, and they're not trying to just smash and steal your credit card numbers. Typically, they are trying to establish a persistent presence on your network so they can spy on you. And to stop that, you need a whole incident response team. In this case, they actually did just want credit card numbers, though, and it was still a very advanced attack. So they made it into a machine and installed a keylogger so they could catch key presses, and they obtained a lot of password hashes, so they were getting to get more passwords and hashes, both of which can be used for lateral movement. And they managed to get hashes from the domain controller, which will include the domain administrator password. So after a month on the network, they managed to install 20 backdoors all over the place. And so they call it backdoor. They made used a malware creation kit to make custom malware which would not be detected by antivirus. And so now they have full control of a system, upload and download. Now they're able to use RDP, which is Microsoft's remote control software, so they can get remote control of the Windows systems. And they can proxy network traffic between backdoors, so they can sneak data out of the system, and they encrypt their data with RC4, and they gain persistence through DIL search order hijacking, which is a very powerful technique that we're talking a lot about in the 126 class, malware analysis. This is the main way you exploit Windows systems, is you put dynamic link library files where they are not expected, and you trick systems into loading the wrong library. It's a way to get persistence, and that's what they used here. All right, so now they have proxies on some of the systems, which are used to just redirect connections so they can make a path to exfiltrate data. And they tunnel command and control traffic in through DNS queries and responses. This is a fairly common technique. You can make a DNS request to a DNS server, and the request will have a long domain name, a long machine name typically, in a domain name, and there is no actual record with that machine name, but that's some encrypted data going to the DNS server, and the DNS server will send responses that also include some encrypted data, so it will look to your defenses like legitimate DNS requests, but in fact it's carrying data in and out. This is called a covert channel, when you're sending messages out of a network and nobody even knows you are sending messages. They think it's just ordinary traffic. Anyway, so they managed to set up a system here with the tunneled traffic, but they didn't actually use it. That was one of the things. This is often the case. People set up things, but then they don't end up using them. All right, so by March, they've been in there for 3 months, and they've already stolen a lot of data, usernames and passwords, IT information and architecture, and information about the financial systems. They are learning how this company handles financial data in order to plot how to steal useful financial data. So they made an FTP connection to an attacker-controlled FTP server to send data out, and they also sent it to the command and control server, and they compressed it in various ways, which is exactly what China did to Google. They stole their data, made it in little files, zipped it up, and sent those zip files out, but eventually somebody noticed it. So they've gained control of a jump server in the internal environment that got them into the restricted financial environment. So this was a pretty well-designed company. It had zones of protection. There's a DMZ that's pretty untrusted, where you have public things like the web server, and then there's a more restricted internal environment for normal business operations, and then there's an even more restricted financial zone where you handle the money. This is the correct thing to do, but the bad guys were able to get in anyway. So they wanted to steal credit card data. Credit card data, before the advent of smart cards anyway, was these magnetic stripe cards, and they have 2 tracks, track 1 and track 2, and they have a number which is used to verify physical possession of the card. But a lot of merchants perform card not present transactions, like over the internet, where they don't ask for that other number, and therefore all you need is the mag stripe number in order to make unauthorized transactions with the card. So they compromised the jump server, and then they put reconnaissance tool on the jump server, and now they began scanning the restricted financial environment to find out what they could steal in there, and they managed to steal password hashes from RAM. And then they spent 2 months going through and finding the systems that handled the cardholder data. and they stole the documents that described the infrastructure to map out the company network. They figured out 90 systems. These are payment systems. I think these are actually machines where people are swiping credit cards. And they found the system of running them. None of these were connected directly to the internet. They were connected to an internal company server, but they managed to make a chain of machines that would let them steal data and move it all the way out to the internet. So you have the restricted financial environment, and you have these credit card processing machines. They put malware on those, and then they had to send it to the jump server, to the mail server, to the command and control server, where they can steal it. And this is pretty much what you have to do. You have to find a path out. A properly constructed network will have traffic control, so you can't go from something like a payment terminal directly to the internet. And this is sort of related to Mike Lindell. You know, Mike Lindell had his thing where he said the voting machines were all hacked over the internet from China, and people said, we don't set them up that way. When the people are actually voting, you don't connect them to the internet at all. But, you know, this is a proper network. You don't allow just machines to go straight to the internet that have high-value data on them. You control that. So they put Citizen Terminals Suite on here, and were able to see running processes, and they were able to dump RAM from running processes. And this is one of the many clues that really makes me think this is Target, because this was a fairly new attack at that time, where they stole the credit card numbers from RAM. They were never written to disk. They stole them from RAM. And this is a fun technique, RAM forensics. Something I demonstrated at Hope maybe 9 years ago now, was at that time, if you went to a browser and logged into Google, your password would just be sitting in RAM, and you could just steal it from RAM. Now they encrypt it in RAM, but at that time they didn't. And apparently on these machines, they did not encrypt the credit card numbers in RAM. That was something people hadn't thought of yet, and this attack was one of the ones that made people take that seriously, because they were stealing the data from RAM. So they stole it, dumped RAM from processes, made RAR archives, and sent it out because they had to develop a tool that would efficiently steal credit card numbers. So they stole complete RAM from running processes and exfiltrated it for analysis. And the RAM from a running process is, 50 megabytes or something. And so they developed a custom binary. It took them 2 days to write it. They wrote a binary called Card Harvest that instead of dumping the entire RAM, it would search the RAM and find just the track 2 data, which is just the credit card number, which is, of course, only a few bytes of data. And then it would encrypt that and send it out. So now all they really wanted was the goodies, and that was a very small amount of data. So on the actual payment terminals themselves, they had stuff that was efficiently stealing just the good stuff and zipping it up and sending it out, which is pretty cool, pretty advanced, sophisticated attack work. So for 3 months, they stole millions of credit card numbers this way. They had this persistent malware on the credit card terminal. You were swiping your credit card in. It was making an extra copy of the credit card and sending it off to the attackers. So after 10 months of exploitation, somebody finally noticed that one of the servers was connecting to a foreign server, and it really shouldn't be doing that. This was part of their chain out. This, as I mentioned, is also how Google caught China. They finally noticed a strange network connection going somewhere that didn't make any sense. And they found out that this was pretty serious. Somebody was really stealing their data, and that created instant response. So after 10 months of being hacked and millions of credit card numbers stolen, they finally figured out there was a problem, and then they obviously hired Mandiant, or they wouldn't be in this book. So they sent in Mandiant team. They immediately contained it to stop further damage. They investigated it to figure out exactly what was happening, all the malware and all the things, and then they planned an eradication event. This is what you do. You don't just take the first machine where there's a problem and re-image it, because that won't fix it. That will just alert the attacker that you're onto them. You have to research it until you know the whole problem, and then you have one event where you fix all the systems and patch all the vulnerabilities. That's the only way you kick the attacker out and keep them out. That's the Mandiant procedure, which is what we're learning in this class. And it took them 2 months to do that. So the investigation team will search for indicators of compromise on all systems, and this is what Velociraptor is for. You analyze malware, or otherwise figure out some clues. The clues will be things like registry keys, listening processes, network handles in the file system. There will be some kind of indicator on this machine that it's infected and part of this attack, and you use a tool like Velociraptor to scan all the machines on your network to see if they have these particular things on them, to find out how many machines are involved in this attack. And That's what you do here. You search for indicators of compromise. You analyze all your systems, every operating system, including payment terminals and everything, in principle. Then you look at the network traffic, analyze the malware, understand the systems until you fully understand the incident. You retrace the attacker's path, and you know as best you can determine everything they did, so you know how to stop everything they did. If you don't succeed in analyzing the situation well enough, you will have an eradication event, and you will lose because the attacker will still have some backdoors, and they'll just come back. But that can happen. Then you have to go through it all again. So your remediation team has a containment plan to stop the theft in progress, even while you're analyzing. And one containment plan that I've heard Mandiant people talk about, although I don't know if they used it on this case, was they actually put in code that would garble the credit card numbers. So they would continue to steal credit card numbers and think everything was fine, but they're no longer getting working credit card numbers. So you're not allowing the crime to continue, but you're also not tipping off the attacker that they've been caught. Anyway, then you plan your remediation effort and have a sweeping eradication event within a 2-day period. And of course, one issue here is you're going to have to take down servers, you're going to have to take down the payment terminals, you're going to interrupt the business. The company is going to lose money from doing all this, and you have to plan to disrupt the business of the company as little as possible. So that was one big case. That was a very smart attacker that took a lot of work to get rid of them. Here's a lower level attacker. The attacker sent some spear-phishing emails with some kind of malicious link, and they planned it because people had gone to like an industry conference. So they just sent it to people who spoke at an industry conference, thinking they would be important people. And somebody opened the attachment with Adobe Acrobat, so that installed malware in their system, and now they have control of one person's machine. So 2 days later, they performed reconnaissance on this, and they found his local VPN credentials. So they could now VPN into the network with Bob's credentials, impersonating Bob. All right. So now they have his username, password, machine certificate, and the local administrator password, which again is the same on almost every machine. So now they don't need to go through Bob's compromised system. They can just connect the same way Bob does, like he's on a trip. And now that they're in, they connect from a home system named Home3. They used RDP, but they're not careful. They closed the window instead of logging out, which means the session persists, and that causes an event to be logged. And that is something that the company administrators noticed. There was an abnormal termination of a RDP session, and the IP address it came from was not the IP address of our actual employee. It was in Texas, where he shouldn't have been. So that suggests that somebody else is using this person's credentials. So they spent 2 weeks mapping in things, installing keyloggers, reading email, and then started getting business critical data from a file share. And they're just a sloppy attacker. They're not as careful as the last one. When they found access control list that restricted it, they had a way to modify the access control list to get in, which will get you the data, but this is probably also going to leave traces. So they stole data, created files, uploaded them to their server, and then they did something really amateurish. They deleted a file and then tried to run defrag to hide their tracks. And this shows that they don't really understand normal forensics. Defrag does not clean everything on the disk. There are tools that will do that, like erasure and like steganography, but this is not the way to do it. This shows that you're an amateur and you don't really understand how hard disk forensics work. So, 2 weeks after they started stealing data, the company set up a security integration and event management system. By the way, that's why we're using Splunk tonight. Splunk is the #1 SIEM system. Splunk exists to find problems like this. You can totally find out if bad things like this are happening on your network with Splunk, which is why everybody wants it. It's very expensive. All the rich companies use it. All the poor companies use imitations. Anyway, so they looked in here, and they found, for example, with Splunk or another SIEM system, you can easily ask, how many times has Bob logged in this week? Where are all the sessions? And you'll see Bob logging in all over the place like he's in several different states at once. That's a pretty clear sign that somebody has stolen Bob's credentials and they're getting in with his account. So they disabled his account, and that would be fine, but by now he had another account, so they found that. And then they've got instant response and say, all right, we really have a serious problem here, and we need to hire some consulting specialists to clean this out. So they came in here, found his IP address found his beacon, and performed a comprehensive eradication event to kick him out. And 2 days after that, they noticed him trying to come back in because they had a overall password reset where they told everyone to change their password, but they didn't enforce it. So not everybody did, and he still had access to passwords. So they had to have another password change, forcing everybody to really change your password this time. And so, here's a diagram of what it might look like. He has a compromised server in Texas, which he used to make a VPN in as Bob or Mary into the internal environment, and then access the Outlook web access over here after he's stolen credentials so we can read the email, and there's these other servers like the compromised FTP and so on. So they kind of knew where the attacker was. You notice something in both of these cases. There's nothing about finding the attacker and prosecuting them and putting them in jail. Most companies don't care about that. That doesn't really benefit them in any way. Only the cops and perhaps like the NSA and stuff care about that. A normal company actually figuring out who it is and punishing them is not really beneficial. All that really helps is getting rid of them and blocking the vulnerabilities so we don't have any more like this, and then we can get on to running the company and making money. And, whether that guy gets caught and goes to jail or not is not really of much importance to our company. What matters is locking them out so they stop hacking us. So here's you have an initial compromise with spear-phishing email. Then they establish a foothold with malware. Then he escalates privileges with password cracking, and then goes to internal recon and moves laterally, and then more internal recon and move laterally as he stole credentials and scanned parts of the network. And then finally, the complete mission is staging servers to steal the data and sneak it off the network. All right, so I got a Kahoot, and then we'll take a break, and then I'll demonstrate the Splunk project you should all be doing. So for the Kahoot, I should have it. I do have it open here. All right. CNIT 52. All right. So what you do is go here to Kahoot. My Kahoot is loading. All right. Let me make sure it's randomized properly. It is. Good. All right. So this is an extra credit thing. You don't have to do it, but it helps keep students from falling asleep. Go to kahoot.it and put in that number, and the people that score high on this, they get 3 extra points. So you get a little bit of extra credit if you're the best Kahooter. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to. Can I share the link? The link is kahoot.it. There you go. All right. And by the way, if anybody has a problem, like you can't see things or you don't know where to go or anything, let me know. Especially with these remote classes. A lot of people are like not having a good experience, and you need to tell me because I don't have any way to know what you're seeing. Don't feel like you're interrupting the class or anything. I want to make sure you folks can see and hear and find things, so you can move ahead. It's very easy to get disoriented and lost, especially since a lot of people have one small screen in a noisy room with a crappy internet connection or something. That's one thing I learned when I taught a lot of workshops to college teachers this summer. A lot of them just have terrible setups, so we had to really be patient. It took like all morning just to get them up to like what would have been step 1, because just a lot of them had serious problems, and you just have to be patient. There's no point zooming ahead when the students aren't with you. You're just fooling yourself. If it were in a physical classroom, I'd be able to walk around and see what's happening, but here I really have no idea if people are having troubles. I'll be back in a minute. I'm going to turn on the light. It's getting dark. All right, looks like I got everybody that's coming. In fact, people are vanishing, so we'll start. All right, what is any observable event on a network? All right, I shouldn't have used the word event. Anyway, that's what it is. That's an event, just something that happens that may not be important for security. All right. There's 1,000 points for each question. It rates you on both accuracy and speed, by the way. Anyway, what's a violation of policy? All right, that's an incident. A security incident is when you have something serious has gone wrong. All right. All right, which team performs damage assessment? Good. That's your investigation, of course. All right. And which team removes the attacker? Yep, that's remediation. All right, good. So let me record the winners. All right. You have to tell me your real name if you want your points. Felipe looks like a real name. And M. Fell, that looks like a real name. So first time, if you want your points, you'll have to come out of the closet and tell me in chat or something. But if you don't care about the points, that's fine too. It is. The customer is always right. Anyway, so that's the lecture part. I'm planning to demonstrate the Splunk part, which is a lot of fun. But before that, let's take a 10-minute break. It's 6:53. I'll come back at 7:05. Just take a break for 10 minutes.